Hello, everyone. It's great to have you all again on yet another episode of our podcast where we talk to industry leaders and experts and influencers from the cloud native, the Kubernetes space. And today as well, we're going to be talking about something very related to Kubernetes and cloud native. And before we get into the discussion, I just wanted to make a few announcements on some of the things that you should know, which is one of the key things that's happening around the corner is KubeCon and Cloud Native Con Europe. So that's an event that's coming up pretty soon. It's happening mid-May in Valencia, Spain. So, do go and attend in person or virtual. And, it's a great event to be part of. I'm definitely looking forward to it. And we at amazic.com will be covering the event as well on our website. We'll be posting a lot of updates from the event. So if you want to even just keep track of things, just talks and different things, just go to amazic.com. There's a lot of stuff we have there on cloud native and Kubernetes. Who is Taylor Dolezal. He is the head of ecosystem at the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, the CNCF, and it's an honor to be talking to him today. Taylor, thanks for joining us. It's great to have you here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting me, Twain. I'm really excited to be here and to meet another Taylor, even if it isn't your first name.
Oh, yeah. And, I want to just start off with just talking about your involvement with Kubernetes. So you've been involved with Kubernetes since the early days. Since which version is it you were saying?
1.14 was when I got started. I started using it probably like 1.2 or so, and then started getting involved with the project at 1.14.
That's pretty cool. And I wanted to just start off with just asking, which would you say is one contribution to the project that you're most proud of?
Yeah. So, oh my goodness, there's, I'd say just, I told them to remove the in front of Kubernetes, just Kubernetes. No, I'm joking. I'd say that it really is, thinking about that, there are just so many things. It's been a wonderful time working with the community on that front. I think that leading the Kubernetes 1.19 release was the most rewarding thing, and definitely something I was really proud to do. I think getting pulled into working as a release lead shadow and getting to work with Jorge at the time, who was the 1.18 lead, and just kind of learning about the whole process, working with a team of about 40 people internationally, trying to, herd cats that are herding cats that are herding cats. That's HERD, not herding. We don't hurt cats at all. We love them. This is the internet. So, but I think that was one thing that was really fun, but really just how welcoming the community was right from the get-go was really fantastic to see. I think my journey to Kubernetes was that I was working at Walt Disney Studios at the time, and was one of the first teams that was getting started with Kubernetes. We had worked with so many development teams, and we kept hearing the same thing over and over. And what that was we do things a little bit differently here, across all of those teams. So they had different build processes, different ways of deploying things. And it was just kind of really difficult to run our team, not knowing what to expect and not having a really consistent interface to work with across teams. So we went all in on Kubernetes, and my team, the theatrical distribution group, was one of the first that got selected to kind of, onboard those services, microservices, and other things, and try to really figure out how it worked. So we did a lot of experimentation around, do we use the COPS project, KOPS, and figure out how to get it up and running? Do we use Rancher? Do we use Terraform? How do we figure these things out? So it was a lot of fun to kind of unravel that. And then once we got everything set up and working, it went really well. And so after that was done, I wanted to track the community a little bit more closely. And that was where that want to kind of get involved with Kubernetes came from. At first, it was be a CNCF ambassador, because I really like talking with people about these technologies and just, having those conversations. And then saw that it was a very difficult thing to become a CNCF ambassador, which, spoiler alert, did happen. I was very excited about that when it did. But I got involved with Kubernetes first when a release Kubernetes lead Shadow application came up. The CNCF ambassadors, they only allow for 2 of them every single month. And so it's very difficult to get, to become an ambassador just because of the big pool of people that have applied. But and you have to show, how have you contributed to the community? I didn't have that many contributions back then, but as soon as Kubernetes opened up as a possibility, I went all in on that. It was just really fun, and haven't looked back since. It's truly what's brought me to the CNCF, and what continues to just really make things exciting and fun. Working with so many people and trying to figure out how to make the project better, easier to onboard, easier to keep up with, etc. It's really fun. I could talk for hours about it. I know we don't have that long, but
it's quite a journey. That's amazing. Yeah. And, I remember at the start, the initial days, so it was just Google that was maintaining and releasing new versions of Kubernetes. And then they switched it to like each, I don't know whether it was different organizations in the community or just random groups. I don't know how that works, but how does it work today? How are Kubernetes releases done? How has it changed since the early days?
Yeah, so really there is I'll have to see if I can find it and add it if you put it in the show notes kind of thing, but there is a wonderful Kubernetes documentary. Many things I didn't know about the project as it was getting to the 1.0 state. I started using Kubernetes at a previous job when I lived in Cleveland, Ohio. Now I'm out in Los Angeles. And moved for that job with Disney. But really just, I think funny enough, the first time I saw somebody demo Kubernetes was spinning up a WordPress instance. So I know that's kind of a running joke in the community now, but like you don't need that. But it was a really good way to kind of show people how you could do that and not have to deal with these, WordPress outages and other things that were kind of a pain to deal with at the time. But so a lot has changed even just from, the inception of Kubernetes to now. I think that my personal take is probably around like Kubernetes 1.5 to 1.8, I would say. You could kind of fit most of the Kubernetes things in your head. There were different special interest groups or SIGs, for like authentication, AWS. And now it's like SIG cloud providers. I think that the biggest things that have changed are really just the refactoring and the abstractions in which people focus on across the community. And then SIG release itself has changed a lot. I think that they've gotten really mature in the ways in which they release software, starting to look at things like code signing now. They're always really on, very, very, they're able to track the Go releases very closely and make sure that those work their way into the Kubernetes release too. So you see the right built with, it's not Go 0.6, it's 1.18.1 and things like that. So it's really, really fun to see that. As well as just again, the people, the community, and seeing people rally around the releases and the release team itself. I think that has just come a long way too, in terms of defining each of the different roles that exist, getting rid of ones that didn't really make sense, or figuring out ways to automate certain things as well. Even the CREL tool, KREL, is quite awesome to take a look at and to see, as far as what the SIG release group has been able to do.
Oh, okay, cool. Wow. It makes me want to ask more about just how the CNCF is structured and the different groups and the different levels. There's clearly different, people doing different things. You already mentioned the SIGs, then you spoke about the ambassadors. There's obviously the TOC, and there's just this huge community of developers and everyone. So there's the vendor organizations, how is it structured? How do you operate at such large scale? What makes this work?
We just use a scheduler. No, what we do is I wish, but human schedulers and calendars. So one thing I didn't know was that I always kind of had that awareness that the CNCF was spawned out of Google and just kind of came out of that need to consolidate everything from a cloud native perspective, being a vendor neutral space so that people felt okay contributing time and efforts into, at the time, Kubernetes. Now just a huge array of projects. So, but the CNCF itself is housed under the Linux Foundation. So we run separately but we are housed under Linux Foundation, which I really didn't realize until very close to the time I got the offer letter for the CNCF. I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that. But so I'm actually a Linux Foundation employee. But so that was really cool. And so we, that allows us to get benefits and help around some of the legalities and licensing and just kind of understanding things from that aspect, as well as to tap into the community, work with the Linux Foundation research groups and teams. So it's really just a net multiplier for us to be able to work with them, despite kind of being our own group that is, very independent. So that's one thing that I think is really interesting, and that definitely helps with some of the volume of things that we have coming in, as well as like you had mentioned, the CNCF is built on 3 pillars, and that's the governing board, and they take a look at the finances and just kind of determine some overall focuses and vote on that front. Those meeting notes are recorded, and there are some public meetings, there are some private meetings. And so that's definitely something to track if you're kind of more, that's like if you like the earlier Star Wars movies where it's a little bit more political, you're like, I don't, maybe at some point you're like, I don't know what's going on. But that's definitely something that's good to track if that's that's interesting to you. The next pillar is the projects and the TOC, the Technical Oversight Committee, and they kind of administer and vote on sandbox and incubating and graduated projects, and just kind of like really helping with that part of the entirety of the ecosystem for the CNCF. And then the last pillar is the one that I'm tracking most closely, and that's the end user ecosystem. So while my title is head of ecosystem, I work most closely with the end user ecosystem folks, and then find out different communities that relate to these projects. So I'm not on the projects team, but I work closely with the projects folks in understanding like, okay, Kubernetes is looking to do this. Like one thing that's coming up is that Kubernetes is looking to rename their primary branch from master to main, and working with the community, putting out a survey to see, does this affect you? Is it okay if we do this sooner than later? And kind of that, helping the community in those aspects. So technically, yes, it's project work, but it's more the community and kind of getting the word out on those fronts. So those are the things I help out with. Some of the other things I help out with are the CNCF radar. We're looking at kind of refreshing that, making that a little bit more statistically sound, and focusing on some things that everyone is going to find relevant and helpful, as well as case studies too. So those are kind of like those are all of the purviews and things that we're taking a look at. And then again, it is kind of like we need to figure out the right abstractions for each of those things. Otherwise, it does get very difficult to handle the influx and just, overall traffic and really just things going on within the community. I think that's one thing that is my personal journey, is to figure out, how do I keep up with Backstage and Vitess and Kubernetes and Helm? How do I consolidate some of those things and make sense of what's going on at any given time without having to track, the main branch and read every single commit? Because unfortunately, no one has enough time for that. But maybe one day, but definitely not today.
Yeah, it is pretty busy. I mean, I look at the CNCF landscape, that page, and it's just so dense, it's just tiny logos. It's really good that you put up there. I love also the numbers at the top of it, it's some 14 trillion, I think it's worth $14 trillion. And it's amazing, just such massive scale. And so what are some of the things that the CNCF does to make sure that the ecosystem is healthy and growing? What are its priorities? What is it? Where is it? What does it want to do? How does it keep the ecosystem healthy and growing?
So really, the CNCF's main focus is the tagline is making cloud native ubiquitous. And so in that, I think it's really interesting, because the phrase is kind of uttered like we're not looking to be kingmakers or selecting the premium solution in terms of any of the projects. If something comes along and it's the next Kubernetes and it's a better way of orchestrating and scheduling, we're going to support that as much as we do Kubernetes, because we want the best solution to kind of win out. Or, in some cases, it's not just one solution. It's not a one size fits all situation. So it's finding ways to support these communities in the myriad of things that they do. I think a good example is like GitOps right now. There's not really a consensus around, do teams use Flux? Do teams use Argo? Do they use another solution? And so that's definitely one area where we support both projects and just try to feed into that. But I think that really it's just trying to be helpful in any way that we can. Like with my focus, I don't track the vendor members as closely as I do the end users. So the difference there being people that are selling cloud native solutions, they have SaaSes or their telcos or their consulting firms, things like that. I work more closely with the communities that are in like financial groups and automotive groups and others that are kind of seeking to run these tools and not necessarily sell them. If they have we have some reservation groups and things like that. So really just trying to figure out the best ways and recipes to run these things within their specific contexts. So that's the best way that we find it has been helpful to really spur the community. And then looking for feedback, we love feedback. I personally love feedback and just figuring out is there anything that we can be doing that would be more helpful? Are there any assets that we can provide that would kind of give you a better way to use these technologies at your company, or to express this new workflow that might be helpful or relevant to you, save you time, make something more efficient or better, or more secure, et cetera.
Wow, interesting. I think great example about GitOps and Flux and Argo. I've seen that myself, followed both projects a bit, and I see that there's just equal support for both, and I really like that. And I want to ask about, since you're so in touch with the ecosystem, I wanted to find out about what do you notice about the different user groups for each other. How are they different from each other, across the different tools, across the various geographic locations where the users are based out of, and across even different scales of companies, the enterprises versus the startups. What are some of the quirks and differences you see between within the entire ecosystem and the user group?
That's a fantastic question. It's really interesting to me. I think for me personally, that means, a lot of my time is dedicated to interacting and talking with groups in the morning, my time. So I'm in Los Angeles and I'm Pacific time. So a lot of the groups that I'll be talking to will be in like Europe and just basically that, GMT -9 or +9 time zone. See, can't even get it straight. But yeah, merry time zone to you. But we'll definitely interact.
I heard you guys are doing away with the daytime saving though.
Yes,
that's a great thing.
I'm so excited about that. It's going to be that much easier. I'm very excited about that, honestly. But yeah, no more PDT, PST. It's just like Pacific time. That will make it a bit easier. I think that's the biggest one, is just really trying to find out, does this need to be something we talk about synchronously or asynchronously? Always favoring asynchronous, but to have those really difficult conversations or just like really intense conversations, it's always best to get somebody, you'd be able to see their face or at least jump on a video call and have that synchronous time. You can hear tone. You don't have to read the text. You can hear the tone and kind of see, is their caps lock on, or are they shouting this? You don't have to go through that, which is kind of nice. I think that's definitely one thing that's been fun. I got to see a little bit more at my previous job at HashiCorp. At Disney, everybody was coming into the office and everything like that before we had COVID hit in 2020. So that was more straightforward. HashiCorp showed me, the best international overlap times. And now I'm seeing even more of that here at the CNCF, which has been really, really good and interesting. I'm seeing a couple groups come up around like the financial services groups. Like that's definitely a bunch of teams within a similar area that are looking at using Kubernetes and other cloud native technologies. How can they stay PCI compliant? How can they operate within each of their own tenants and rules within their companies? And that is difficult in some cases because you know, some teams might not be able to use Zoom or Google Sheets or the tools that other companies like, you know, that's a staple for them, right? So, so you do have to, you know, use email or some other things, or just get creative when it comes to being able to share that information out. Unfortunately, with some groups, they can't even use GitHub. So it's like, it's really difficult in that respect, but we find a way, you know, open source finds a way. And so that's really inspiring and fun to see. I've seen a little bit more machine learning and artificial intelligence groups kind of come up and really just want to get involved with Kubernetes and figure out how to run their workloads as well as train their data models on Kubernetes. And then just a really interesting like swath of people that are, you know, looking to get started, looking at managed services, looking at multi-cloud. What does that actually mean? You know, it's not just Google Sheets and Microsoft Excel and 2 different tabs. It's, you know, using different databases across different clouds and trying to find the best ways to go about doing that. So you really do have these people that are just getting started, and that's its own, you know, concern and abstraction. Then you have these people who have been running Kubernetes for a long time, or just running Kubernetes at ridiculous scales and trying to figure out, you know, how do we make this consistent across our accounts and our clouds and our policies? So they're just, all of the conversations in those places are just very interesting to kind of hear and to discuss. But it's apologies, I don't have a more specific answer, but it's very much the it depends answer. But there's just so much going on, and each of those conversations is truly fascinating to have.
Yeah, I find that, you know, the common thread in all of this is that communication and collaboration seems to be the main issue that, you know, these groups face, and is where most of the quirks are. And, you know, related to that, you know, where does most of the communication happen? Is it on GitHub in these projects, on the community branches and other, or is it somewhere else on CNCF? And do you see CNCF creating standardized sort of spaces where, you know, these groups can come and interact in a better way? Do you see it moving in that direction, or do you see it being more decentralized as time goes?
Yes. I see a lot of the conversation, like a lot of the more noisy conversation will happen on Slack, at least when it comes to like Kubernetes or CNCF. There's just, again, a lot going on. So it is kind of difficult to keep track of what's going on there in some respects. But it's like when I just ran a survey recently for one thing, and shared out different links for Slack and email and a couple other different communication channels, and got the most engagement with email. I didn't get the most with Slack. And so that was kind of surprising to me. I thought it would be at least somewhat of a difference, but it was like all email, no Slack. So, you know, that's the biggest thing that I found too, is that, the way that information propagates, it's finding ways to keep, repeating this and just getting that attention, no matter where the ingest of, someone's action items might be. But it definitely varies between GitHub, Slack, and different like mailing lists or groups. A lot of the times we'll discuss these things on calls, of course, but whether it be weekly, monthly, whatever the cadence is of those different working group calls or special interest group calls. But I think a lot of the work happens on GitHub and like those core code discussions. And then in terms of policy and everything else, that's typically done through email and through Slack. So that's also just really interesting. There's a there's a book called Hello Internet, I think is the name of the book, but it goes into like the different modes of communication within different contexts like that too. It's a really fascinating read, and just like why emojis can help with tone and showing that use case within these different contexts. So that's just something fun that's definitely become more relevant more and more recently.
Yeah, interesting. Got to check out that book. I wanted to segue a bit into talking about just, vendor organizations and open source, and just how do they handle open source, especially, since they've got a lot of developers on their payroll, and a lot of the contributions come from these organizations. So, just wanted to ask about, just to begin with, why, what's the reason that, an organization should encourage its developers to contribute to open source? And why should they not see it as taking time away from doing useful stuff for the company?
Absolutely. No, that's another great question. I think that it's difficult for certain companies to realize that. I'm sure everyone, just about everybody, has worked at a company like that, or just doesn't really understand. Open source, we've all agreed, sounds good, looks good, is a good thing, but how do we get involved? How can I really, pitch that or sell that? I think that Nicole Forsgren did a lot of incredible work in writing, like her book Accelerate, and just everything that she did at the Dora organization, which I believe Google acquired, and just like showing that you can actually trace, high performers to actual, like revenue dollars delivered. So you can see that outsourcing, I think it was like a 3% decrease in gross profit margins. And like she just did such an incredible job of outlining how this can be harmful, and then how higher performing teams that are able to get things to market more quickly, are able to, utilize open source as a base. And that does translate to actual dollars. And so I think when she was able to frame things in that way, certain teams started to get it. I think a simple analogy that I can think of is kind of like, if you are with friends or family for dinner, and everybody, uses bowls and plates and all those things. If you leave that up to one person to wash, they're at it forever. Everyone else gets to have a good time, but it's at the cost of that one person's time, which isn't really, it's not the most responsible thing to do. But if everyone lends a hand or washes their dishes, or is able to, has a little bit more energy, a little bit, just had some coffee, maybe able to jump in and help out where they can, then it's a lot easier for everyone else. And the same thing applies to open source. If everyone's jumping in and able to help out a little bit, if it's time, if it's money, if it's contributions, if it's something, that helps us go a long way. And just because teams don't help, or just because it's free, quote unquote, in some cases, free as in, puppies, other cases, you can look at it or fork it, but you might owe something in some way, shape, or form. That even if it is free, it's still something that isn't, it's, you still benefit from having the context of the full community. And you still have to run the thing too, right? If you download Kubernetes and if you run that alone, that comes with etcd, and it helps to know how that works, especially when it stops working, or we need to restore that. So there is a cost somewhere in there, even if something is free. And wouldn't you be in a better place knowing how to run that thing, having that education by working directly with the community, or getting some training or some other context. So I think that's kind of my pitch to companies that I've worked with before that might not have understood what it is. And we're truly looking to, that's my job, is to try to give that value add back to the community, firsthand, those end users, that are looking to use these technologies, and figuring out what's helpful. Is it going to be recommended architectures and some sample code for different ways in which you can run these things, or put these cloud native technologies together? Or is it reports? Is it research? Is it, so that's kind of what I'm looking through right now, and having a lot of fun talking with different people and teams about as far as what's going to be helpful for them.
Yeah, thanks for that book recommendation. Accelerate, I should check that out. And interesting analogy as well. And open source scales a lot better than the kitchen sink. That's a good thing.
Thank goodness. Yeah, we have horizontal and vertical scalers for our sink. I don't know about you, but
and some great examples. Then, related to that, I want to talk about, it seems like what you're saying is, organizations need to take a long view of, seeing ROI on their contributions, and just seeing, them getting something back. Also, related to that, there's this thing about, when making contributions, especially if you own the, or you've begun the project, a company is in a dilemma about licensing. And, recently, not very recently, but a year back, we saw, Elasticsearch switched their licensing. Before that, they cited MongoDB as an example as well of, who switched their licensing midway through the project. What are your thoughts on just licensing of open source projects, and how do companies go about that? Because, there's I don't know how small, but there is a section that believes that, these companies need to have some way to better track, or get something back from their investment in the project. It seems like it's more giving than receiving. What are your views on that?
Yeah, so my views have changed a lot around this recently, and definitely, not just thinking from, not with my CNCF hat on or open source
Hmm.
hat on, just from
Yeah,
a
yeah.
general, business perspective stance. I think that there was a really good Changelog podcast, and they went into exactly that. They talked with both perspectives on that issue. People that wrote that spec and that I forget what it was called, but basically looking at that legal agreement and saying, no, this is why it makes sense. Talking with other groups and saying, no, it needs to be more permissive. And it was just a fascinating conversation because they took into account both sides of the arguments that people were posing. And so I thought I recommend that to everybody. Again, we'll try and dig up that link, but it's definitely worth a listen
Mm.
if that's something that's of interest to you. And, open source lawyers, you could be anything these days. That just sounds so fascinating to me that we're starting to take that level of, get that level of insight into how these things work. But one of the things from that podcast that I thought was really interesting, kind of changed my perspective a bit, was talking about how Amazon really invested a lot into Elasticsearch, and their
Okay.
argument was, hey, you do get this notoriety. A lot more people are using your product. No,
Hmm.
you aren't getting those direct sales from this, but this is, something that you wouldn't have been on everybody's map in the way that you are without this kind of network effect. So
Right,
that was
right.
something that I thought was very interesting. And I'm like,
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
that does make some sense.
Hmm.
And then in terms of some other things that I like considering in that front, I do think that the most permissive license is the best one, because then you're able to kind of take in everybody's contributions. Most of
Hmm.
the time, it is a very small subset of people doing a lot of the commits, and then a lot of the long tail of people working in open source are just the one-off commits, or just a couple, just a handful of
Hmm.
commits. So it is
Hmm.
really, you're seeing a lot of the progress get pushed forward from a small subset of people in most cases. And so that's another thing to kind of take into account. So even if something is open source, it might just be a smaller group that is working on that. So just to be mindful of, it's people like knowing what's in their cereals and their food and the nutrition facts. And as we're starting to get SBOMs and some other tools and metadata about our projects, I think that's helpful too. Like even right now, I know etcd has one maintainer, and there was a call I was on earlier today where they were walking through the code because they're trying to get more maintainers. Do we solve that through training and some other things? But I'm kind of going off on a tangent, but it's just really important to know what's in your project. Most of all, the license itself. And then when I worked at HashiCorp, another thing that really changed my perspective there too was how they were able to be successful in getting these tools to be widely adopted. And
Hmm.
I really do think it was because of the fact that they gave the full featured product away and then built up a software as a service offering on top of that. To
Hmm.
me, that makes the most sense, is having
All
this
right.
open source base.
Hmm.
And then because you're the team that built that tool, you're the
Hmm.
small subset of people working on this thing, have an
Hmm.
open governance model, but which HashiCorp doesn't currently. It's a for-profit company,
Hmm.
but I feel like you can do this in open source, and there are some other examples. And you really focus on giving away that open source project for free. And because you know so much about the core product and the core problem, that's really the testament, right? Is that you can build a service on top of that. You know best how your customers or this subset of people work. So that to me means that you can build the best SaaS out there. And if there is competition within that space, that's only going to make you better, is my personal standpoint. That's kind of how I see all these things. And so I think more permissive the license, the better. Pull things in, make things more competitive, and just that makes stronger projects overall. And seeing what happened with Log4j and everything else, and kind of like the community waiting for like, does anybody have that? Kind of was stressful for a lot of companies and for people. And, it just is a bummer to be in that place, not have that certainty. And so to kind of pair a good license with a good group of maintainers is just so important.
Yeah. So, I want to just tee off on this thing you mentioned, which is Log4j, Log4Shell issue. So it's a big issue because, it kind of would deter even those who are starting out with open source, to feel like, this is just not ready yet or something. And, and for those who've gotten, had a bad experience through all of this, and it's a big issue for CNCF because, CNCF is all about open source. So is CNCF doing anything in response to, the Log4j issue? If yes, what are some steps that you guys are taking?
Yeah, so I know the Linux Foundation overall is really getting involved there, and that they've met with the White House and some other groups on Log4j specifically. I know that they have some links on that front. I've read a few. There's even more that I haven't read that I absolutely need to. And so I know that they're definitely involved with that. And really, I do think it comes down to exactly that, is like trying to, I think with something like Log4j, it just seems like it was almost the victim of something that was so widely adopted and used, and there just wasn't that oversight. I do think that things like secure bill of materials and some of those other efforts that are kicking off now, the Open SSF organization that is spinning up, I think that those are moves in the right direction. Should we have been there yesterday or 10 years ago or 20 years ago? Absolutely. But the fact is we just weren't, unfortunately. So I think that focus, it couldn't come at a better time because we really need that help. And so it's nice to see that come along. And I think that that's going to help push us in a better direction going forward. Again, I think that transparency and that visibility on the project itself leads for more opportunities to call things out and say, like, I don't think this is secure. How can we be sure that this is going to be all right? One of the things that I like that the CNCF does for their projects, for graduated projects and projects, just before they hit that state, they do a security audit and an analysis. And so sometimes they'll find some really interesting things for the yearly audits and some other things too. I know that they'll take a look at that as well. So I know there have been some interesting vulnerabilities that have come out for Kubernetes specifically, and some others where we've been able to jump in and to fix that. And then even things like security lists and kind of like raising up those exceptions and letting people know, people that are well versed within those contexts, let them know, hey, we have this thing coming up. Can we fix this? And that would mirror something within a closed source perspective too. The difference being that you have a lot more oversight and a lot more people looking at it versus in a closed source situation. That definitely will not be the case.
Awesome. Well, yeah, those are some good points you made. And yeah, I think security is definitely a moving target and you're never going to arrive there. So, it's something that it's good, that we're taking these measures, SBOM and these different measures that we're taking. So yeah, that's great. We're almost out of time. I have probably the last question on the CNCF and the ecosystem. And just want to end probably on an interesting, maybe positive note about just, the open source talent that's available. There's a talent gap. There's been a talent gap. Do you see that closing? Where do you see fresh talent coming from? What do you see with the fresh talent that's coming in? Is there something that gives you hope about just, talent and how, is it growing and where it's headed at in the coming years?
Absolutely. So I think that there's definitely, everybody's biased. I think my personal bias with this is that open source for me has really been a big boon to my career. When I was at some previous jobs and just like not feeling bright and sparkly and motivated, I was able to kind of lean on Kubernetes and work with people in that community and, get some successes, work with people, learn new things. And I think that it truly did help me level up as an individual. And I think that opportunity exists for anyone that is, feels courageous enough to jump and start working in the open. I think if you're thinking about it, give it a shot. I think it's worth trying just to see to yourself if it's something that you like doing, something you don't like doing. A lot of people, when they first start getting involved with open source, they kind of see it as like, oh, well, I can't rewrite the scheduler to Kubernetes, or I can't do this giant thing. But you don't have to. I think even if it's just like, no, this is an exclamation point, this should be a question mark. This is, the sentence doesn't really make sense. We're missing this example in the documentation. This logo could be edited or changed. This new project to kind of get all of these separate pieces of information together would be helpful to have. There are so many different contexts that you can get involved, and it is 100% an iterative process. So you don't have to do something perfect the first time, and the community is just so overwhelmingly welcoming. So I think that, I definitely encourage you to check it out if it's something that you kind of are going back and forth with, in your head and your heart about. Definitely try to jump into some calls. They're free. Take a look and listen. Even if you're just passively listening to some of these calls, there are some incredibly smart people on these calls and talking through problems. And again, even if it's not a contribution, just something you hear on a YouTube stream or a Zoom call, that is something you could potentially use at your team, organization, or in your personal life too. That even just some of the banter, before and after the call is really fun and funny too. And just like about some things people discovered from a personal standpoint too, not even code related in some aspects. So it's always a good time. And there's always the opportunity to learn on that front. Open source isn't as scary as it seems. And again, if there's something, that's why pull requests exist, so we can kind of work and walk through. You don't have to worry about too much on that front, because you've always got a safety net and a team that's really enthusiastic about that too. I think that's the other thing for me too, is that it just, if you do feel kind of like things are going slow at your main job too, being within the open source community is a great place to see again what other people are working on, and even make connections. And maybe you're not looking for a job change now, but down the road you are. You help build up your network too. So again, it's just the community. The community is the best feature by far, is what I would have to say on that front.
Yeah, I really loved also recently I saw notifications on different translations that are happening. That was quite exciting, especially, being in India, we've got like hundreds of languages. So, it's nice to see that, it's not just English now, there's different languages that people can, read up docs and stuff on. Really cool.
I loved seeing that too with the website and some blogs. I know that there's that one project that just kicked off from one of the CNCF sub communities around the business value subcommittee, I think. And it was the cloud native glossary, and kind of like, what is service mesh? Oh, you can go look it up. So seeing those things come out and have the translations is just one of the many great examples, like you brought up, in terms of trying to, let's get this out to more people. Let's make this more accessible so that people can participate and, get these benefits.
All right. Yeah, that's awesome. So we've got just a few more questions, but these are more sort of getting to know you better questions. I love this segment. So about around 5 questions, and so here goes. Probably is going to make you sound like a person showing favoritism in your role, but then your favorite open source project and why?
Oh, this is good. My goodness. I think it's definitely changed at different parts and times in my life. I think I would say Kubernetes would be my immediate answer, but I think that I don't want to give a typical answer. But I think that the next one that I'm really kind of excited about, it's more of an ecosystem as well, is just WebAssembly in general. I think I'm learning a lot there with like the WebAssembly interface and just kind of like Rust bindings, Go bindings, all of those. So really just that community and being able to target any kind of platform. You have WebAssembly as a place to run your code. That promise of being able to write once and run anywhere, can we really make that happen? And it seems like that's trending into the yes category. So I think that's been one of my favorite recent projects to pay attention to and to kind of work within. I don't know everything. I know a very small amount of stuff on WebAssembly, but I'm getting to hear and talk with people that know quite a bit about that. So that's been a lot of fun.
Very cool. Next one, your favorite startup city?
Favorite startup city? I would say, honestly, I'd say Colorado. I'm from Cleveland initially. There's a little bit of a startup scene there. So, obviously a very special place in my heart for Cleveland, but I think Colorado is definitely one that I just find really beautiful. I've gotten to go there. I think it's been about 2 or 3 times, and really just love that there's just such a vibrant community there, as well as hot springs, mountains. The sky is scientifically more blue when you look at it because you're closer to it. It's also really dry, so bring a lot of water if you do go check it out. But and get your electrolytes. But I really love it out there, and I do like it in contrast to the Los Angeles traffic as well. When you drive 40 minutes, you can go about 40 miles. Here in LA, 40 minutes is probably a mile and a half. So very different.
Really cool answer so far. So yeah, your secret superpower.
Ooh, secret superpower. I would say keeping things more realistic. I can get into my full like superhero slash supervillain backstory at some point in time, but I think superpower is really triage. I really while I was at Disney, I was the incident manager for the things going on within Walt Disney Studios, and so that was really fun. And it was kind of fun for me to be able to triage or kind of work with different teams and narrow down the scope of the problem and really understand where the issue is happening. Yes, a good time it was DNS, but the other times that it wasn't, it was really interesting to see like, okay, is this a cache problem or a database problem? And just like try to reduce the scope and then finally finding that gold of nope, that's the incident, that's where it's starting to happen, or it's never truly one core problem, it's a bunch of dominoes that get knocked over. So figuring out what was at fault is always fun. So I love that, and definitely would consider that triage and identification one of my superpowers.
Wow, so you're one of the few who works well under pressure.
Absolutely. That's that cool. Or 3 a.m. Yeah, a lack of caffeine.
Your favorite part about KubeCon?
KubeCon, I think not to trend too closely to other people, but I really do love the hallway track. I do think that I've heard KubeCon referred to as like summer camp or just like a getaway for all the cloud native folks, and I really do agree with that. I think that just the even more so now, the ability to see people face to face and have interactions. And like, I feel like all of the cool things that we work on, within that quarter of the year, that half of the year really come about at KubeCon. Like those really innovative ideas come from the gathering of all these people in one place and just this really focused conversations together. So I do like that. And then, KubeCon, finding out where the ice cream social is as well is also a great part about KubeCon whenever that comes about. Where are the snacks?
All right. Your last one, your one productivity hack that you love and use.
Ooh, another great question. I would say as you can, get things out of your own head. Your brain is a great place to store things, but finding out a really good method of notation for you is even more important. So because if you record that in your computer and it's backed up to the cloud, in many cases, not all, but at least 5 nines guarantee that you're going to have those notes at a later point in time. And so I think that and figuring out your to-do system is really the biggest productivity hacks that I've seen. And then lastly, on executing those, I've recently been introduced to time boxing, and that's going through your calendar and blocking out, specifically and very in a detailed way, identifying what you want to work on throughout the day. So not just like 1 to 5 focus block, go through it and be like, I want to work on this thing from this time to that time, give yourself like a half an hour and some breaks in between. But that's been a real help for me, especially working at the CNCF with so many varying things that we have to work on, for sure.
Really cool. If I can just ask a follow-up to that last one, Please. Do you like blocking off short, like Pomodoro kind of slots, or do you like longer, like Cal Newport, long deep work kind of slots?
I'll definitely do deep work. I'll try to vary things up because a lot of times I won't notice. I'll get like really into a flow state, and so I won't realize that a couple hours or a long periods of time have gone by. And definitely want to keep drinking water and get up and like move a little bit, get the blood flowing, and just not lose that state of mind, for a long period of time. It works good for a short amount of time, for a couple hours, but I want to keep that going as long as possible. So I'll try to take, every like 25 to 30 minutes, I'll try to at least get up, get some water, move about a little bit. And so that's been really helpful. But I do sometimes, to start off, like just to block out my calendar, I might block like a whole day or a long set of hours, so people can't schedule meetings, like just preemptively, grab that slot of time and then go in the day before or a couple hours before, and then mark off specifically what I want to work on within that big block, and then get rid of the big block once I've got it all full.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. So where can people find you online, Taylor?
So people can find me a few different places. I'm just about everywhere online with the moniker Only Dole, ONLYDOLE. But I'd say I'm most responsive on Twitter and LinkedIn and GitHub. If you want me to take a look at a PR or something like that, I'm always happy to give it a look. I know a lot of people will say, please don't at me, but please do at me. I love having conversations about cloud native, or if you're looking for a place to get started, if you have any questions on that front at all, I'm always happy to have that conversation. My direct messages are open, and hopefully don't get too many. I try to get through them as fast as possible. If I'm not getting back to you, it's probably because I'm sleeping or rebooting, or I've encountered a blue screen of death. Working my way back towards a successful BIOS boot. But yeah, Twitter, LinkedIn, GitHub, all great places to find me with that only Dole username.
Awesome. So with that, we'll be closing up. Just a few announcements and then we're done. So to our viewers and listeners, thank you so much for joining again. It was another great interview with Taylor Dolezal. And he gave us a lot of insight into just how the CNCF works. And I think really motivated us to really be part of what's happening at the CNCF. So it was really exciting. You'll find a lot more talks like this on amazic.com. So go visit there, read up all you can, and follow even the coverage of the upcoming events. And one of them that we're talking about particularly today is KubeCon, Cloud Native Con Europe. So that's happening in mid-May. It's in Valencia, Spain. So do attend virtually or in person, and we'll be covering it as well on amazic.com. So with that, I want to thank you again, Taylor, for joining us and sharing just so many insights from your experience. It was a delight talking to you. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. If any of you go to Valencia, I'll see you there, and we'll definitely look to be sharing a glass of orange juice with you. I hear the Valencia oranges are great.
All right. Awesome. That's it. Thank you.